Hello and welcome to the Rewilding the Artist podcast, focusing on a culture of care in the arts, a place of inspiration, supporting you to bring a culture of care into your environment, whether you're a freelance practitioner or arts organisation. I'm your host, visual artist and changemaker, Gaia Redgrave. So today I'm welcoming, and I'm very pleased to see, Lisa Hudson and Lindsey Colbourne from the Utopias Bach collective. And we're going to talk about how Utopias Bach found itself working within a culture of care. So, hi Lindsey, hi Lisa. Would you like to just introduce yourselves and a little bit about Utopias Bach first?
Hi Gaia, what pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm Lindsey and I'm based in Eryri in North Wales. I'm an artist, and what do I do in my practice? I suppose also my arts practice is a bit like Utopias Bach, so we'll be talking about that, but my practice is really based around bringing diverse people, and by that I mean humans and more than humans, together to, to explore things, find out about things, sort of creative collaborative inquiries. And my job title in Utopias Bach is a keeper of the compost. So
Keeper of the compost, fantastic.
Oh, thanks, Lindsey. Hi, Gaia. It's lovely to be here. And I am Lisa Hudson. My practice has always been experimental and a bit like a research process in itself, researching my relationship between people, places, and things, and sort of how to be human. And my role in Utopias Bach is observer of metaphor and reflective learning. Yeah, and it's really lovely to be here chatting with the two of you today, representing Utopias Bach.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great. Something that's jumped out to me, what you said, is how to be human. I don't know if that will come into what we're talking about today, but it would certainly be something I'd love to hear more about at another time. And Utopias Bach, I was going to say, I understand Utopias Bach is slightly different to how a lot of collectives work. I'm part of Utopias Bach, so I should already know that. But would you like to explain a little bit more about that for the people that are listening?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I think that's interesting that, like, one thing we keep saying is that Utopias Bach is different things to different people. But I'll try and give, well, my take on it, which is, I suppose, the sort of simplest way about talking about Utopias Bach is that we're a creative collective, and we're kind of based, well, we are based in North Wales, Northwest Wales really, but there are members of Utopias Bach, like you, Gaia, further afield. So you down in Pembrokeshire, but we have people across the UK, and also we have had people from outside the UK as well. And at the heart of it, I suppose Utopias Bach is about the way that we work together with diverse others, including, again, the more than humans. So by that, we're talking about, I mean, some people might call it nature. Things that are outside humans. And we create art together and support each other's practice. It's called Utopias Bach. So Bach means small or nook, has many other connotations in Welsh as well. But it's the idea of bringing together the idea of utopia, which is they tend to be these big ideas, world transforming ideas, which always go wrong when they try and implement them. And the idea of being Bach as small, grounded, locally resonant. And we are looking at how do you do the small, what are the small, really transformational things we can do to try and learn how to live in a different way, better way in the future. Yeah, should I say a bit more about how we work, or will that come later?
I'm quite happy to hear more about how you work. Is there anything you'd like to add, Lisa, to what Utopias Bach is? Because I heard Lindsey say that it's different for different people, and that's her take on it. What's yours? Is it similar? Is it different?
It's similar. I think we both experience it in quite a similar way. For me, it's another layer. It's become the most important layer, really, in my quest to figure out how to be human and how to relate to others and the world around me. So it's like a very joyful coming together of like-minded people who are interested in the same things as me, and a space in which I can ask questions and explore things which I have found in the past in other parts of the world I've been sort of laughed at or told to be more realistic, or to, I feel like it's somewhere where I can be heard and where I can be taken seriously, and where sort of the small things that interest me are of interest to others as well, which is rare, actually.
It's lovely to hear that you found that space. And I think that sounds a little bit, when I say it's lovely to hear, that sounds a little bit twee. I don't mean it like that. I mean it like, actually, that's such a positive thing in the world today, that you found a place that you can be heard and be taken seriously. And it feels like a great place. Does it always work like this?
I don't think anything can always work that well. We do come across issues and problems in working with others, and the sort of things that we're investigating. But I feel like we still have a safe way of solving those problems on the whole. It's not smooth sailing all the way, but it still feels like you're, to carry the metaphor through, that you're in a boat with a good crew that you trust.
That sounds fantastic. And it sounds like possibly some reflection goes on there around that. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about how Utopias Bach works. And I know that you wanted to do an introduction grounding exercise as well for the people that are listening. And we could come back to those topics later on if it's appropriate, or we might find that a conversation goes down a different route. So shall I hand this section over to, I think it was you, Lisa, that was going to do the grounding exercise and go into that?
Yes, definitely. So this is something that everyone can take part in if they would like to, if you're listening to this podcast or us here today in the present, because this is already becoming something that's happening now, but is also will happen in the future, which is also quite exciting in itself. This is when we meet in our collaboratory meetings, which we'll talk about later. One of our processes is that we will always start with a grounding exercise of some sort. So I'd like to invite everybody to participate in this grounding exercise. It's a simple exercise that marks a boundary between the space that we're about to enter of reflection and conversation and a Utopias Bach space, and separates it slightly from whatever we may have arrived with our day that we've had so far, and our concerns outside of the questions that we're looking at today. This activity is called drawing breath, and will take about 5 minutes. And what you need to have is a piece of paper as big as possible, something to make a mark with on that piece of paper, and a very comfortable place where you can feel at home and where you can sit and be and draw. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can press pause now and find your things and then come back. So when you're ready, find a comfortable spot with your paper and your drawing tools in front of you. I'd like to invite you to become as comfortable as you can. Settle into your chair or wherever else you may be sitting. And if you're able, place your feet on the floor or make some other physical connection to the ground. The main thing, the most important thing, is to feel comfortable in your space. You could lower your gaze or close your eyes and take a deep breath in and let it out. And deep breath in again and let it out. Follow your own breathing rhythm. Focus on your breath, on your inhales and your exhales. If your thoughts appear, let them rise, acknowledge them, and then let them drift away on your breath. Notice how your body feels, starting at your toes moving up your body all the way to your head. Notice how each part of your body feels. When you're ready, allow your hands to begin moving on the paper, following your breath, responding to the sounds and the sensations of your breathing and of how your body feels. Use one hand, use two hands. Make marks on your paper without looking, without judgment. Just let them become. Let your marks flow to the flow of your breath and your body. And then begin to imagine breathing in harmony with everyone else in the house that you are in, the building you're in, the street. Feel that connection. Let your breath spread out into the world. Let your breath flow further. Start to expand. Think of the trees. Breathe in and out with those trees. As you breathe in, they breathe out. As you breathe out, they breathe in. We breathe together. Let yourself begin to slowly come back. With each in-breath, pull yourself closer into your own body, back into the room where you are. Feel that connection with the others in this community. When you're ready to join us, you can open your eyes, look up, turn on your camera, wherever you may be, whatever it takes to return to this space.
Thank you, Lisa. It's mine.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That was great.
Oh, beautiful.
We're showing each other our images now. Well, Lisa's is
Lindsey.
Sorry, yeah, Lindsay's is amazing. Lots of swirls and undulating marks on the paper that almost look like to me this amazing tree that's full of energy. So it's really interesting that it came out of that. When I look at mine, which is very, very different, there's ovals and squiggles are almost like fire and circles, but I don't know if you can see down here. I can see, might be a bit ambiguous over the screen with here. I can almost see a butterfly, which I think is quite fascinating. Breathing together is a wonderful feeling. That's community in itself.
Yeah, of course, Lisa hasn't had the same experience, of course, so there's a bit of self-sacrifice there.
In other times, I have done a drawing at the same time, but I didn't do that this morning. But in the past, when I've done this exercise, that feeling of connection, particularly with the others in the room and the trees, has always been quite sort of beautiful and tangible.
It's quite a wonderful start for the beginning of a meeting, or as we would say, collaboratory, when we work together, often on Zoom, sometimes in person. It's both now. There's a lot of hybrid work within Utopias Bach. How would you say that doing something like that, doing that grounding exercise, makes a difference to the meeting? Does it make a difference? How does it generally proceed from there?
Well, I think it's interesting that they've become such a core part of our practice. I would say that we do them in all meetings. We've been talking about the collaboratory, which is our sort of monthly gathering. It's almost like the heart of Utopias Bach. And we have a sort of core set of people perhaps who tend to turn up, and then we have others that come in and out. And that's one of the things for Utopias Bach, that you don't have to commit to doing everything or being involved all the time. You can come in and out. And I think having an exercise like that came in because, well, as we started in lockdown, of course, there was in some ways there was more spaciousness in the world, and we started to focus really on where we were, and part of understanding where we are and bringing our whole selves. We talk a lot about ensemble practice, which Ian Biggs has brought in as a term, like that, the whole of ourselves present into a meeting. It takes a while to do that because we're not like that in the world. There's not. You need time and space to do that, and I still find it, it doesn't happen naturally. I've worked on this and I've got better at it over time with these exercises, but I think it just creates that space where you really can start to be present. And we did quite a lot of stuff with guided visualization until we realized that actually that can be really challenging and ungrounding. So what Audrey West was pointing out, for example, it can be a dangerous place to go. So we moved more towards grounding, didn't we?
Yes.
Time.
Less guided, because that takes the individual out of it and allows each person, it takes a single individual out of it and allows each person to follow their own path within the meditation.
And there's something about bringing creativity in that space, that because we record a lot of our collaboratory meetings or our meetings, you can see the pace of the conversation changes after these, the feeling that everyone can take part, because in some way you're active, you're not a passive recipient or waiting to have to perform. I feel it really changes the nature of how we're relating to each other, and the spaciousness in the meeting. That Samina Ali brought that in really early on. Like I worked for 30 years as a facilitator, and I thought I knew how to run meetings really. And she took me on one side one day very early on and said, "Oh no, I don't think there's enough space for people to take part in this." And at first I was just sort of overjoyed with that someone would challenge me on process, and that's been a sort of core part of developing this and other things that we do. Yeah. It's been really good to respond to people saying, actually, this doesn't work for me. We need something else.
I think when you've got space, it allows things to come in that might have been missed before. It allows for seeds to grow and a new part of the ecology to come into existence. Have you found that to be the case?
I'm not sure I fully understand that question, actually, I think.
I'm thinking that what came to mind when Lindsey said about people can just flow in, flow out. It's okay if you come to a meeting, not come back for a while, or if you're there all the time. It made me think that the people within Utopias Bach were a metaphor for the collaboratory breathing. People breathe in, people breathe out. And within a collaboratory, I, from experience of being there, know that you don't shy away from space between conversation. Sometimes there's silence. And in that silence and in that space, it allows for contemplation and reflection, where something new could come in, something new could be seeded. Whereas if the conversation was continuous or people were talking over each other, there wouldn't be space for that thought and that contemplation. So those new seeds, those new ideas, those new ways of thinking or new ways of understanding may not come into the open and be seen.
I think you might have a really good point there. I don't know if I'd thought of it in that way, which is, but yes.
I don't know if I had until now.
Brilliant. This is how the collaboratory works with the space, isn't it? Ideas start to form. I know that I've noticed at first the silences that would occur in our Utopias Bach collaboratories. I could see in myself and in others that they were almost painful. They were sort of excruciating because they were such a new thing. And I would feel like someone needed to fill that silence and I have to really hold myself back from jumping in. But after being part of Utopias Bach for a while now, going to other meetings where that doesn't happen, where the conversation sort of person jumps onto the tail of somebody else's point and there's no space between, it becomes overwhelming very quickly. And I'm no longer as good at coping with it. If I feel like all meetings should have that space in them, really. And you can see in meetings that don't, that there can be sort of 3 or 4 people out of maybe 10 who jump on the tail of each other's conversations and others who never get a word in, or you find yourself wanting to say something and then by the time there's a space for you, the conversation's moved on and you can't really say it anymore. And that doesn't happen in Utopias Bach, and that's a really precious thing that I don't think I'd realised how important it was until recently.
So I think we could say that she says jumping in on the tail of Lisa there. Okay, I think we can say that, would you agree that the grounding and the silence and the learning to be human are aspects of potentially a culture of care within Utopias Bach? You may or may not agree with me with that, but I'd be happy to hear your comments on that. That would be great. But also, what other aspects, how else have you found yourself working within a culture of care?
Well, I think, it's been really interesting you bringing in the term culture of care and you joining Utopias Bach, Gaia, because you've brought to the surface and sort of pinpointed things that were happening. I'm not saying that we did them unconsciously, because we always had this, we always knew we wanted to explore process as a Utopias Bach in itself, in that we're trying to be a microcosm of how things can be different in themselves. But you brought a focus and you've encouraged us to think about things more explicitly. And in fact, one of the structures, as well as the collaboratories, we have, originally we were going to call them projects, so we might do little projects, but we realized we don't want to call things projects. We want to call things experiments, not in the sort of very formal scientific way, but in the idea that we, without any expectation of outcome, or indeed actually timescale, we want to do these very loose experimental things where we're trying things out that we don't know if they work or not. And because those are led by different people in ways that they want to work, I think that has given a sort of spaciousness. I mean, this, even when we had a year of Arts Council funding, which tends to be quite difficult to manage when you're an organisation or a collective like us, we had that as part of our structure, and the Connect and Flourish funding from the Arts Council was all supportive of that, which is very unusual. And I pray for more of these types of funds. But through that, we create, I think that loose experimental structure where different people could lead also created a space where people can be different, and different people led their experiments in different ways. Well, including you, Gaia, and Lisa and I did. We all did very different experiments, which actually all started to feed off each other. and learning from each other as we go, which I think is unusual to be open to that. And we don't really have a sense of failure. We have a sense of just learning, continual learning, and I think we're curious and inquisitive about each other and diversity, and if we get a clue that something's not working from something someone says, like, I don't know, something small, like, oh, when we have a break, how long should the break be? And someone says, oh, 5 minutes. Someone else says, oh no, I can't even get to loo in 5 minutes. Let's go for 15. We'll go for 15. We don't just carry on regardless. So I think, yeah, that's a core part of what we do, I think, as well.
I'd like to pick up, that curiosity that you talked about. I think that is essential, and it's really central to the way Utopias Bach has begun to exist in a way. And also the reflexiveness that halfway through a meeting, if somebody says that something is uncomfortable, or if we sense that something's not working, because of our lack of attachment to outcomes, we will divert immediately. We don't carry on regardless, just to get to the end of something. We will take as long as it needs to take, which is possibly helped by not being funded. But we will take as long as it needs to take to look at what that is. And we'll possibly, because we're on the same quest really of finding out how to work together, there's a place where we're very dedicated to that, where we will question and reflect and change and adapt in the moment. Which, is it something to do with ego? It's like there's no one person designing this. It's not being delivered to others. It's all just happening together at the same time. So if something's not working, there isn't one person who feels like they failed or who feels overly responsible for that thing not working. It's a group thing at all times.
And I sort of sense that within this culture of care, by being interested and responsive to people's needs, including your own, learning to be responsive to your own, which for me, I found that really challenging. Like, that actually, it's just, and a lot of people have talked about this, like Vanda Zaborska's talked about this a lot. And I noticed it in her first, actually, that just starting to admit where you've made mistakes, starting to bring things that you find challenging about yourself, it's just enormous potential for growth. I think it's turned into, in fact, receiving feedback and so on can actually be a tremendous gift rather than something to be defended against, and not needing to be perfect, and recognizing. One thing I recognize all the time within this is, particularly from you, Gaia, I remember when you sent an email before joining Utopias Bach, and I saw your access rider at the bottom, and I was like, oh no, she's going to absolutely hate this. How can we invite her to a collaboratory? So I emailed Samina, like, oh no, what should we do? And she said, oh, just invite her to join the collaboratory. And I was too scared to do it because I thought, oh no, we might hurt somebody here. But you joined anyway. And then learning from you actually what does work and thinking about that. It really is the first time I've started thinking about that really explicitly. And then after that, a lot of other people bringing what they need, different neurodiversity needs or disability needs, or confidence, or what triggers people, and it becomes this very interesting, really human environment in which to work, which is complex to negotiate but joyful.
Complex and joyful. That's an interesting combination. And I know out of complexity and joy, there's been an exploration of hybrid events. There's been an exploration of how Utopias Bach have been so welcoming without what people might consider standard words on paper policy. There's been a consideration of how we look after our ecosystem that is Utopias Bach, and doing that through making. We've also spoken a little bit earlier within the podcast about things don't always go right, and we said that we may or may not come back to that. So there's sort of 3 or 4 different aspects that are all enormous things to speak about. So is there any one that you would like to touch on now in relation to a culture of care? Because we could always come back to the others at another time if it was something you'd like to explore. But is there just one you'd like to take so a little bit more about?
What do you think, Lisa?
Oh, I'll put you on the spot now. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
The policies, maybe the policies one is quite
Yes,
good.
I was torn between policies and yeah, policies is good, and what we think of as policies. I think I was thinking about how what you were saying just before the question, Gaia, about the fact that we didn't really have policies in place that should to deal with different people coming in, and just the fact that I think that was possibly because we didn't have a policy that we could be so receptive to new ideas, because if we'd done the traditional thing of possibly writing, or more likely downloading, a policy of dealing with neurodiversity or with disability or whatever, that you might have thought that that was sorted and we didn't have to think about it. Whereas because we don't have written policies as such, we have sort of collaborative conversations about a thing, has allowed us to put things in place as and when they're needed, rather than trying to get everything done at first without really knowing what it was, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, we had, I suppose very early on in the collaboratory. So when we started in lockdown, we started with, I don't know how many of us were there. Well, there was Lisa, Vanda, Samina, and Julie, and Debbie, Brad, and there's a few other, maybe 6 of us started meeting, and then gradually it grew without, we've never said we wanted to grow. We have a analogy of being like a strawberry plant that Lisa, our head of metaphor, Lisa, was in that process there. Maybe after a couple of months, after having these online meetings, everything was online then, exploring what might we do together in response to the state of the world, basically, and ourselves. We did come up with a set of values and principles and questions that we wanted to explore. And in a way, those values and principles have stood the test of time. So we probably did them maybe like November 2020. We did them collaboratively in the meetings. So things like we want to keep small, that we're asking questions rather than looking for answers, celebrating diversity, noticing. There's a sort of range of them, and in a way they're almost like the thing we talked about them because it's exploring what did we have between us. Yeah. And I think it is the opposite of an organization that downloads a policy. And we have started to try and do some of those things, like what can you do? Well, Gaia, you bought this again. What can you have as a policy that's not a boring piece of paper? I mean, we've done that from the beginning. Like if we have agendas, they don't look like usual agendas. So in our experimental tree sense school, we had the one where we were doing the Charter of the Trees. The agenda was on a stick, and each session was sort of painted on. And so we do agendas in a different way. So even agendas aren't just like a usual one. Every time we're trying to question what's the mainstream and how can we subvert that or do that differently. And one of them is this tick box policy culture, which in my mind is all focused on having the policy, not at all on what the practice is. And we are absolutely the other way around. So it's about what's our practice rather than what that tick box is. And then every now and again, of course, you come across funders or other organizations that require some kind of tick box. And we even try to subvert that if we can, don't we?
I think that's an interesting way forward, because there is so much where it's seen that a written policy is required, but it's often written by somebody without the lived experience and without the experience and the knowledge to then deliver what is written. So the fact that what I'm hearing is that Utopias Bach didn't box yourselves in, literally in the tick box, with policy, and has created an open, reflexive approach, seems to me like the obvious way forward for being an open and nurturing and what's the word? A welcoming environment. You have more of a concept which is skills rich from the group as opposed to a piece of paper with words. And you mentioned earlier that we're exploring it in different ways. And Lisa, you and I have particularly been not presenting that, but introducing that for everybody to then work with. And is there anything that you'd like to say about what we're doing with that? I know I can talk about it, but I didn't know if you'd prefer to talk about it.
So one of the policies that we were looking at, there was an expectation of a safeguarding policy, which of course is important to consider safeguarding, but and we began considering it as how could that work as a document, but we soon realized that because of what we've been talking about before, but that we don't have policies, we don't box ourselves in that way, that we couldn't just download a safeguarding policy to tick a box, but that what would it actually mean to genuinely 100% look after everybody within our group. And we've thought of the metaphor of an ecosystem. So thinking of, how rather than protecting certain characteristics, whatever, how do we as a whole feed and support each other and allow that energy flow as it works in an ecosystem to stay balanced and to not be overtaken by one or two people, or or a particular type of chemical or whatever, if it was an ecosystem, how to keep that balanced. And we started thinking about it like that, and we brought it to the group, to the collaboratory, as the idea of an ecosystem, which by bringing that metaphor, it was not a perfect metaphor, and the group, as we discussed it, we realized that wasn't working at all. But what came up was the idea of what it does make us feel safe, and what is it, how could a safeguarding policy be more experiential in a way, and as a group, the idea of a quilt rose to the surface, of something that could be woven in and created with intent. It could exist in more than one place. There could be parts of the quilt all across the country. It could be a metaphorical quilt. It could be a physical quilt, but its intention is to think about ways of looking after each other and caring for each other and wrapping each other up really in the sort of warmth of the quilt, which is now a sort of experiment that is spreading out across Utopias Bach, with people interpreting it in different ways. We've had one session of crafting our quilt together, which brought up great conversations and sort of thoughts about what this could mean, and it's going to continue in our other collaboratories while we make quilts. Some of us are making quite traditional stitching quilts, some are writing poems or just thinking about it in the terms, and it will be it's probably going to be a forever work in progress, whilst simultaneously sometimes being done enough for what we need it for at the time, which feels like, as as a creative collective, it feels like this is the way we work best, is not in trying to sort of box ourselves in or trap things into words that you then can't wriggle out of. It's something that can change according to need and can be there according to need.
It's such an interesting and relaxed yet purposeful process that has so much richness coming from it. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens and what comes from it, and discussions about policy. Will something be created? In addition to that, we don't know what will happen with it. Will it be a space of experience? We don't know. So that will be really interesting to see what comes out of it.
What I'm loving about this process, I don't know if it's spreading to everyone else, but it's just from my perspective, I love the fact that it does take such a long time. So that, you might think of a sentence for a policy in about 30 seconds and write it down and maybe review it or whatever as many times as you like, but stitching into a quilt, or this gives you really time to think through making as well, to be doing and thinking simultaneously, and the making feeds the thought and the thought feeds the making. So it allows it to sort of come more from the heart, I think, certainly from me. I'm not very good at quick thinking and coming up with this, on the spot question answer sort of thing. So I love this process of being able to think slowly through material.
I love the process of, for me personally, of the repetitive action of the sewing. I'm sewing wording onto one of my grandmother's old pillowcases, so beautiful old cotton, that's a receptacle for imagination as part of the quilt. So that repetitive process of sewing stitch by stitch by hand of each word sort of feeds into my neurodivergent being, so I can calm and be peaceful, mind and body, which allows for that flow of thought, that flow of connection. So for me also, it's a perfect process. I'm really loving every minute of it and being really, really excited about it, to be perfectly honest. I can't wait to see what it becomes, what it morphs into, what it changes into, what is added, what is taken away, and how people experience it, because I don't see it as just one thing. I see it as it just that it would just mold and change and evolve into different things at different times for different purposes and different people. Listen, watch this space, isn't it, for this one? I think watch this slow space. So we've heard about a number of things about how Utopias Bach do things differently, and about a culture of care. We've spoken about grounding and silence. We've spoken about being human and learning about being human. Spoken about breathing and reflexive creativity response to policy. We've spoken about noticing clues of what people might need within our collective and how we might enable that to happen, for it to be a better space for people to experience whatever their lived experience is. We've spoken about curiosity and process and questions rather than answers. We may get to answers, but that's not the goal, is to question and learn. So that's quite a long list of things that seems to have grown organically. But what I'd like to ask as we draw to the end of this podcast now is there something over and above all this information that people can take forward into their own environment, whether it be a collective or whether you're a freelancer or whether you're an organization or a funding provider? Is there one bit of advice or one little thing that you could say that people could try to just bring a culture of care into their environment, flavored by the Utopias Bach way of doing things?
I suppose for me, it's about taking that aspect of starting small. I think part of one of the dominant cultures, the sort of neoliberal Western white culture, is things are only worthwhile if they're everything and massive, and all pervasive. So I think starting small, just with one or two people, just try doing things a bit differently, and then see where that goes without expectation of conquering your organizations. Completely transforming an organization's culture. Just start a bit. We have to start with ourselves, don't we? And so it's possible to change from very, very tiny, and just noticing and moving from there.
I think for me, it's interesting because that question almost feels like it goes against the Utopias Bach thing. What, to condense it into one thing? What's the one thing? How can you possibly do that? But I know what you mean. You're not actually asking us to pin something down with a
No, not at all.
never and ever. This is a moment, and for me, it's that curiosity mixed with reflexivity, which is all connected to not being attached to results. I love being in process, and I'm not very good at finishing anything or deciding that something's finished. I like to be doing it. I like it to just be everything to be continuous, I think. And in Utopias Bach, it's that sense that nothing is fixed, that you feel it's almost like you're encouraged to notice when things aren't okay, and to look at fixing them, and also to not have a time frame in which that has to be achieved. It's a beautifully allowing that not being so. The essential part for me is the not having attachment to a result, like with an end date or a target that needs to be hit, that really allows you to follow all of your curiosity and to wonder and to reflect. Yeah.
Wow.
What would
Such a
be yours,
wonderful
Gaia?
So you're asking me what would mine be?
Yeah, I was asking
Yeah.
you.
Oh my goodness, really? And all I can say again is, really? That's me that. Okay, what would mine be? What I found wonderful from Utopias Bach is you're simply being kind, care, and beautiful human beings, and not hiding behind policy, not working simply from words on paper. You working from heart. You working from desire to create a space that's welcoming for everybody. And I'm not the only person that's benefited from that, which is fantastic, but I have truly benefited from that. Working in a group and working with people is very difficult for me, being neurodivergent, but I've found a home, I've found a space, and I echo what Carlson would often say is, I found my tribe. And I'd like to thank you for that. It's been truly amazing, and I hope it continues for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a nice end.
Yeah.
Or not an end.
So on that note, I'd like to thank you, Lisa and Lindsey, for joining me today for Rewilding the Arts, Rewilding the Artist. Shall I start that again? I'd like to thank you, Lisa and Lindsey, for joining me today for the Rewilding the Artist podcast and sharing your thoughts and experience on the culture of care within Utopias Bach. Thank you. This podcast sits within the Rewilding the Artist project, an innovative journey to equity and authentic self-expression, highly supported by the Arts Council of Wales Lottery Fund. This podcast can be found on Spotify and YouTube. You can find Rewilding the Artist on Instagram and further resources on the website. All links can be found in the description. Thank you for listening and enjoy the journey.